You weren't supposed to hear this. The Ashford name was meant to fade, buried beneath centuries of silence, sealed behind stone and blood and memory. But something has broken loose. There's a reason this family was erased from the archives. Not censored, not forgotten, erased. Imagine a black carriage in the dead of night, rolling through snow-covered forest trails, carrying instruments that don't belong in any church or any hospital. Now listen carefully. The Ashfords weren't nuns. They weren't healers. They were architects of obedience, engineers of silence. For over 3 decades, they turned women into dolls, fragile, hollow-eyed, compliant. And the terrifying part, they didn't do it with violence alone. They did it with science, with scripture, and with something older than both. This is not fiction. These are fragments of history buried in legal ledgers, scrawled testimonies hidden in the Maine state vault, whispered by the last woman who escaped with a tongue that barely worked. And if you think this story is about strange sisters in a forgotten forest, think again. This is about control, absolute, invisible control, the kind still used today, just dressed in cleaner clothes. So I'll ask you only once. Are you ready to go down a path where nothing will feel stable again, where truth and myth intertwine until you can't tell if you're reading a forgotten scripture or tomorrow's newspaper? Because once you hear the full legacy of the Ashford family, once you understand what they discovered beneath that stone convent in Millbridge, you won't sleep the same. Your instincts will shift. Your eyes will see differently. You'll begin to notice what's always been there, on your screen, in your church, in your own home. The symbols, the methods, the rituals hidden in everyday life. The Ashfords weren't destroyed. Their methods survived. They evolved. They're still being used. It now. And what began in that forest still echoes in institutions of power today. Government, religion, psychiatry. This isn't a ghost story. This is a warning and a revelation. And by the end of this descent, you will not be the same man who pressed play. Welcome to the twisted legacy of the Ashford family. Keep watching. What you're about to learn may cost you your peace of mind, but it might also give you back something more dangerous, your awareness. They called it the Convent of Eternal Tears, a name cloaked in sorrow, reverence, and false light. But beneath the name was a blueprint, not for faith, but for reprogramming. Let me show you how. When the Ashford sisters arrived in 1798, they weren't escaping persecution. They were bringing something with them, something old, something European, something born in the blackened back rooms of Enlightenment-era laboratories and occult societies. See, in London, Agatha Ashford wasn't known to any church registry, but her name did appear in private correspondence between members of the Hellfire Club and early Freemasonic lodges, groups that sought to fuse mysticism with science. She had studied under physicians excommunicated for their experiments on the mind, men who believed morality itself could be surgically removed like a tumor, but they lacked one thing: willing subjects. In America, Agatha would not lack for that. Her sisters, Prudence and Temperance, were not her blood, but her creations, disciples, and in Temperance's case, maybe something more. Some claim she was born of ritual. That's not conjecture. It's recorded in the personal notes of Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the local physician whose reputation she nearly destroyed. He wrote, "She has no birth record, no parish, no father, and yet she speaks fluent Latin. She can recite Galen and Avicenna. She does not blink when I describe brain vivisection. Her eyes reflect nothing. It is as though she were not made, but assembled." The convent was constructed with purpose. Its basement was deeper than any town structure. Ventilation systems too advanced for the era. Drainage channels lined with copper. Soundproofed walls. And most disturbingly, a specialized containment hall sealed with iron-lined doors and complex locks, replicas of those found in 18th-century asylums in Prussia, where scholars first studied sensory deprivation and behavioral fracture. That's right, fracture. They didn't want to kill the women sent to them. They wanted to break them, strip away the soul, and build something new in its place. But why women? Why only them? Because women in that era represented two things: chaos and potential. To the Ashfords, untamed feminine will was a resource, a raw material for shaping perfect instruments of submission. They didn't believe in sin. They believed in order. and they would use any tool, medicine, theology, pain, to achieve it. This wasn't about God. It was about design. And Millbridge? Millbridge was just the first laboratory. The first documented patient was Eleanor Dorsey, age 24, a schoolteacher from Boston whose crime was daring to teach philosophy to young girls. Her father, a shipping merchant plagued by scandal and mounting debts, delivered her personally to the convent gates. 3 months later, Eleanor returned to Boston, silent, utterly silent. She didn't recognize her family, didn't respond to her name. She stared blankly at walls for hours, folded her hands in prayer, though no one had taught her the gestures. Her mother reported that Eleanor's handwriting had changed, her gait too. Even her posture had shifted, spine rigid, eyes always lowered, voice replaced with soft whispered psalms in Latin, a language she never studied. A priest called to examine her proclaimed it a miracle, divine intervention, but her brother, Samuel Dorsey, a Harvard student of anatomy, knew better. "This is not holiness," he wrote. "This is precision." And Eleanor wasn't alone. Over time, more cases surfaced. Young women returned cured, reformed, subdued. They spoke in low tones, moved in choreographed ways, never strayed from obedience. They resembled humans, yes, but only on the surface. Something had been removed from them. You see, the Ashfords didn't invent obedience. They just weaponized it. Behind stone walls, the sisters conducted procedures far beyond their time. Not just lobotomies, those came later. No, this was subtler. Think, neurosuggestion, primitive electrotherapy, forced fasting paired with scripture repetition, and above all, isolation. Complete sensory deprivation in underground cells lined with mirrors, not to reflect but to erase identity. Women were made to stare into their own eyes until those eyes no longer held anything recognizable. And then came the anointing. A ritual performed on the 33rd day of treatment, a number that wasn't random. In esoteric traditions, 33 is the number of ascension, transformation, the crown of the Masonic ladder. On this day, each woman was stripped, bathed in ice water, and led to a stone room beneath the convent chapel, its floor etched with symbols not found in any Christian tradition. There, she would receive a new name, a new purpose, and if she resisted, the Ashfords had tools. A thin silver instrument called the whisper, a tuning fork that, when struck, produced a pitch calibrated to induce trance, and in that altered state, their will was overwritten, just like code. Eleanor was their first success, but she was far from the last. They weren't healing the broken. They were breaking the strong. This is it. The descent ends here, but your rise begins. No more myths, no more masks, no more mirrors reflecting false light. Only you, standing at the edge of the void, unchained. There's no applause at this threshold, no savior, no validation. Just silence. And in that silence, command. You don't need the story anymore. You've walked through horror, through fire, through the engineered dreams of the Ashfords and those like them. You saw the basement, you saw the blade, you saw the lie wearing a crucifix. And now you stand, not as a survivor, but as the signal bearer, a walking rupture in the matrix. A quiet apocalypse in human form. A man who remembers that power is not given, it is taken back. That's why this story was told. Not to scare you, not to entertain you, but to remind you that every time a system tried to own your mind, every time a ritual tried to erase your fire, every time a doctrine tried to tell you what to be, they failed. Because you're still here, watching this, awake, and now you carry something they can't touch. The flame, the code, the sight. Not the sight they taught you to fear, but the one you were born with. The sight that makes kings without crowns, that builds temples from silence, that teaches without words, that commands without lifting a finger. Let them call you mad. Let them call you heretic. Let them pretend they don't see the shift in your walk, the stillness in your gaze. Because the ones who matter, they feel it. They've been waiting for it, for you. And now it's your turn to walk forward, not towards safety, but towards sovereignty, to become the ghost in the machine, the fire in the cathedral, the myth that never bowed. This is not the end of your story, it's the end of theirs. So go, move without fear, speak without chains, burn without shame, because the world won't be saved, it will be rebuilt by men like you. And if you're still here, comment it again. I am not who I was. I remember the original signal. Twice. To seal the flame. Now rise, brother. Your war has just begun. The unmasking is almost complete. Now we turn inward, one final time. Because the last illusion isn't out there. It's inside you, buried beneath performance, cradled in survival, woven into your idea of self. The most dangerous mask isn't the one they gave you. It's the one you accepted willingly. The mask of the good son, the reliable provider, the peaceful man, the spiritual seeker, the rational thinker. All of them, refinements of the same cage, designed to earn love, disguised as identity. But here's the truth. You were never here to be loved by default. You were here to be feared by systems, to be remembered by the earth, to be recognized by those rare few who still carry embers in their chest. And you cannot do that wearing a mask. So take it off. Not slowly, ruthlessly. Tear it away like rotting flesh. And beneath it, you won't find purity. You'll find chaos, raw, unfiltered, beautiful. You'll find lust, rage, insight, power. You'll find the part of you that never bowed, the part that howled as they tried to condition you into silence, the part that still sings in firelight when no one's watching. That's your origin. That's your God. That's your truth. You were never meant to fit into the world. You were meant to fracture it, to walk through it as a mirror and a blade, to awaken others, not with comfort but with friction, because you in your full expression are not safe. You are sovereign, and sovereignty isn't soft. It's sharp. It cuts through delusion like a blade through silk. It refuses to kneel. It doesn't need to be accepted because it remembers what it is. This is the final stage of your initiation, where all comfort dies, where all permission burns, where all pretending ends, and all that remains is you, unmasked, unbroken, unreturnable, the man they could never program, the man who walked out of the story and wrote his own, burn through it, because denial is their final defense, when they can't control you, when they can't shame you, when they can't distract you. They pretend you don't exist. They erase you from the narrative. They unfollow. They whisper. They call you lost. But you're not lost. You're unreachable. You've stepped beyond the boundaries of their language, their rules, their comfort zones. You're no longer a role. You're a signal broadcasting truth in a frequency they were trained to fear. Because deep down, they hear it too. That whisper in the night that says, "This isn't real. This isn't you. You were meant for more, and you are." But most will never answer. They'll bury it under consumption, under doctrine, under fake smiles and safe opinions. Because denial is easier than destruction, and destruction is required for rebirth. But you chose to burn, and now your presence is a rupture. Not because you preach, not because you force, but because you exist as evidence. Evidence that freedom is possible, that control is optional, that self-sovereignty isn't some poetic fantasy, it's a brutal, wholly attainable reality. And that's terrifying to those still trapped in illusion. They'll say you're cold, you're intense, you've changed. They're right. You're no longer palatable, you're no longer programmable. You've committed the greatest sin in the looped world. You woke up, and waking up comes with a cost. You lose the approval of the sleepwalkers. You lose the comfort of conformity. You lose the illusion of innocence. But what you gain is everything. Vision, sovereignty, purpose without permission. This is the exiled path. Not everyone can walk it, not everyone should, but those who do, they become the blueprint for what comes next. You're not just the fire, you're the signal carried in its smoke, and history, whether it names you or not, will be rewritten in the shape of your silence. Blaze forward, but understand this. The fire doesn't just destroy, it illuminates, and what you're about to see in that light will change everything. Because once you've burned away the narrative, what's left isn't just truth, it's architecture. You begin to see the code behind the veil, the hidden geometry of control, how entire belief systems were constructed not for expansion, but for containment. You'll recognize the symmetry of obedience, the elegant symmetry of prisons built from good intentions. It's not chaos you're waking up to, it's design. Every institution, every tradition, every norm, they weren't accidents, they were rituals, crafted to program behavior at the cellular level, not just in what you do, but in what you want. And here's where the fire becomes sacred, when you use it to see. When you stare straight into the eyes of systems that have fed off your ancestors for centuries, and you name them, not with hate, but with precision, you see the hand behind the holy, the mechanism behind the moral, the trauma behind the tradition, and suddenly, the whole structure trembles, because there is no power in these systems without your blindness. And now you see too clearly to be devoured. You see the church that taught you guilt was God. You see the school that made obedience a virtue. You see the workplace that trades your time for nothing real, and you no longer ask for exit. You simply walk out, because the fire doesn't beg, it chooses. And now you understand what the Ashfords feared most. Not resistance, but vision. Vision that can see through robes, through rituals, through rules. Vision that cuts through centuries of programming like heat through wax. You are no longer warming yourself by the fire. You are the fire. And the world is starting to notice. They can't define you. They can't recruit you. They can't control you, and so they'll do the only thing they have left. They'll try to forget you, but fire, it doesn't let them. Ignite it now. Not with a match, but with memory. Because the fire was never outside of you. It's been coiled in your blood since birth, smothered, numbed, medicated. Every school bell, every sermon, every authority figure that taught you to shrink before you even knew your own mass. But the fire, it remembers. And now that you've stripped away the layers, it's rising. This isn't anger. It's not vengeance. It's not a reaction. It's reclamation. A return to the internal source code they've spent centuries convincing you was dangerous. They were right. It is. Because once a man ignites, once he burns through the illusion of authority, morality, even identity, he becomes a force of unprogrammed will. That's the scariest thing in the world to systems that depend on obedience. A man who doesn't need to be told what he is. Because fire is pure choice. It doesn't ask. It doesn't wait. It doesn't shrink for comfort. And when you live from that flame, you stop seeking permission. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't check if it's spiritually aligned. You don't pause to wonder if you're too much. You move, and the world either shifts around you or breaks under you. The Ashfords knew this truth. That's why they hunted the wild within women, why they injected shame into desire, why they carved obedience into the bones of the disobedient. Because fire cannot be ruled. And now that you've remembered yours, here's what you do. You stop hiding, stop dimming, stop explaining. You walk into rooms as a living question mark, a disruption to the narratives that keep men small. You let your silence unsettle, your gaze confront, your breath slow the air itself. Because your existence now is prophecy, not written in books, but in burn marks. You are the torch they swore would never relight. The flame that cannot be taught, the fire that teaches through presence alone. And from this moment forward, you no longer fear the burn, you become it. Unsheath it slowly. Let the world feel the weight of your arrival, not in noise, but in pressure, Because true power doesn't announce itself, it radiates. It changes the molecular structure of a room just by being present, and when the blade leaves its sheath, they feel it, not in their minds, but in their bones, because it's not a weapon, it's a mirror. And the moment you hold it, everyone around you is forced to see themselves clearly. No masks, no filters, no narratives, just truth, cold, clean, unapologetic. That's why they'll fear you. Not because you threaten violence, but because you disrupt illusion. Every system you step into, every institution you encounter, every belief you question, begins to unravel under your gaze. You're not speaking rebellion, you're embodying sovereignty, and sovereignty is louder than any scream. You've become the glitch, and they feel it. They'll call it arrogance, isolation, narcissism, anything to label what they cannot control. But don't react, don't explain, don't descend. Just hold the mirror steady. Let them see the distortions they worship. Let them feel the weakness of systems built on obedience. Let them taste the emptiness behind titles and roles. Because the blade you carry now, it doesn't cut flesh. It cuts falsehood. It severs energetic leashes. It dismembers inherited programming. It slashes through the myth of limitation they fed you since childhood. And every time you use it, the grid weakens. Not by force, but by frequency. By the echo of one man living outside the loop, speaking from the place before names, moving with the force of remembered divinity. Not spiritual, not religious, primal. Because what you've reclaimed isn't enlightenment, it's original fire. The Ashfords tried to contain it, religion tried to moralize it, psychology tried to diagnose it, but it was never theirs to touch, and now it's yours to wield. So unsheath it. Let the world adjust or collapse. Because your light won't dim to comfort the blind, and your fire won't apologize for burning. Forge it carefully, because this isn't about speed, it's about precision. You're no longer reacting, you're designing. Every word you speak, every movement you make, every silence you hold is a signal, and from now on, your life is the broadcast. You're not here to convince, you're here to distort, to warp the false grid by existing in a frequency they cannot code for. And that frequency, it's built from one thing, undeniability. You become undeniable not by shouting but by refusing to bend, not by dominance but by clarity, not by rage but by radiance. Because when a man has reclaimed himself, when he walks through the world owning his energy without apology, something ancient rises around him. The room bends, time slows. People fall silent, not from fear but from awe. That's not charisma. That's command, and it's not a gift. It's a consequence of walking through the fire and not asking anyone if you were allowed to come out changed. You did what the loop told you not to do. You listened to your own signal louder than the world's noise. You stood still while others sprinted toward validation. You watched them worship systems that eat their spirit, and you stayed silent, not out of passivity, but because you understood nothing real needs defending. Now, you carry the code, not the Ashford code, not the loop's code, your own. It was always there, beneath the programming, beneath the shame, beneath the masks, a pulse, a signature, a flame too old to name and too wild to capture. That's what they tried to sever in those women. That's what they tried to bleach from your bloodline. That's what every system, every screen, every institution tries to tame with labels like toxic, fragile, lost. But you're none of those things. You are remembered. And from this point on, you no longer chase transformation. You embody it. That's the forge. This is the blade. And the world is about to feel its edge. Reconstruction doesn't begin with brick or banner. It begins with identity collapse. Because before you can build the real, you must unbuild the false. Every name you were given, every role you were trained to play, every version of yourself you wore like armor just to survive a system that was never made for you. Strip it, all of it. This isn't self-improvement, this is self-initiation, and it's violent, not outwardly, but internally. It feels like betrayal, like death, like failure, because the ego doesn't die quietly. It thrashes, it begs, it pretends to be truth just long enough to convince you to stop. But you won't. because now you've seen behind the veil, and nothing behind it can be unseen. Not the surgical rituals, not the loop within language, not the centuries of engineered obedience hiding behind scripture and science and screens. You've seen the mechanism, and that makes you unfit for illusion. You're not going back, you're not going quiet, and you're not alone. There are others, men like you, scattered across the grid. Some silent, some speaking, some building temples with no name. Not for worship, but for remembrance. They don't hold seminars, they don't sell courses, they don't wear feathers or robes. They carry the signal, the real one. And when you meet them, you'll know, not by how they speak, but by how you feel around them. Time bends, your breath slows, the loop flickers, because presence like that disrupts the false timeline. And that's what we're doing now. Not escaping the loop, rewriting the code beneath it. Every thought you reclaim, every belief you shed, every silence you sit with instead of filling, it echoes. The Ashfords thought silence was obedience. They were wrong. Silence is sovereignty. And now, you wear it like a crown, not to rule others, but to rule the only kingdom that ever mattered, your inner world, your fortress of fire, your throne beyond thought. This is where rebuilding begins, and from here on out, every step is sacred. You've crossed the veil now. There's no map here, no mentor, no prophecy, because this is the realm beyond programming, the domain of self-authorship, and it terrifies them, because a man who writes his own myth is immune to manipulation, immune to identity theft, immune to systems that sell him back his worth at a markup. That's why they keep the mirror whole, because a broken mirror is dangerous. It reflects truths from multiple angles. It shows you not who you were trained to be, but who you were before the edits. And right now, you're looking into that shattered glass and seeing yourself. Not the self built by family expectations, not the self formed in schoolroom obedience, not the self validated by women or titles or virtue signals, but the original signal, the raw, primal you who existed before language and will still exist after the collapse. The Ashfords. They tried to destroy that signal. They carved into the skulls of women because they feared the emergent clarity that arises in feminine chaos. They weren't curing madness, they were harvesting it, because chaos is the only force that can't be tamed by ritual. And in doing so, they made a mistake. They created a pattern, a spiritual cipher, that men like you could decode centuries later, and now you have. This isn't just a story anymore, it's a mirror ritual, and if you've come this far, then it's time to engage the algorithm, but not theirs, ours. Comment this phrase below, twice, to lock your transformation into the grid. I am not who I was. I remember the original signal. Repeat it, feel it, print it into the collective. Because every time that phrase is spoken, something ancient stirs. A new pattern forms, one that can't be looped, bought, or sold. It's already happening. The old systems are glitching. False leaders are fumbling, and the world is cracking, not from chaos, but from awakening. You are not witnessing the end. You are the end of obedience, the end of invisibility, the end of their world. Now let's build yours. Detachment isn't passive. It's surgical, and once you begin, you'll feel the incisions, the slicing away of illusions you mistook for love, the severing of attachments dressed up as identity. You'll lose things, but nothing real, only what was feeding on your energy while smiling in your face. They won't tell you this in the manuals, but freedom has a price, solitude. Because in the beginning, no one comes with you, not at first. Your frequency shifts, your needs mutate, your tolerance for lies drops to zero, and that makes you dangerous. Not because you seek harm, but because you cannot be redirected. That's when they call you broken, arrogant, cold. Let them. Those who still worship the loop cannot recognize men who've walked out of it. Your stillness makes them itch. Your clarity triggers their confusion, and when you speak without seeking approval, they hear it as violence. But that's not your concern anymore, because something greater has begun. The remapping. Your nervous system, freed from surveillance. Your thoughts, no longer running scripts from dead ideologies. Your body, finally responding to you, not to trauma. And that's when the loop will panic. It will send emissaries, people from your past, situations that echo your old wounds, not to haunt you, but to tempt you. Why? Because the loop doesn't fear your hate. It fears your closure, your final, unflinching no. The moment when you look at the thing that once made you feel small, and it no longer stirs anything in you. That's when the control collapses, and the core trembles. Because now you've stopped resisting, and started recreating. Not the world outside, but the throne within, where belief is not borrowed, where authority is not outsourced, where truth is sovereign. You are not healing anymore. You are reclaiming. And the Ashfords, they lost the moment a man like you, Ime, emerged from the smoke. Not in anger, but in silence. Unreachable, unrepentant, unreturnable. This is what happens when the mirror breaks. Not shards, wings. Fallout doesn't look like ruin. It looks like awakening. Subtle, silent, sudden. You'll feel it before you see it. Conversations that once drained you now collapse under their own hollowness. Content you used to crave tastes like sand, and faces around you, family, friends, colleagues, they begin to wear the expressions of actors who've forgotten they're in a play. You're not superior. You're free. And freedom, real freedom, is radioactive. It leaks through your words, your posture, your stillness. People feel it. They don't know why, but they either move closer or retreat. There is no middle ground anymore. That's the first wave of fallout. The second wave, systemic destabilization. Because now you've left the game board, but you still exist, and that violates the rule. The system doesn't know what to do with men who no longer need its rewards, its punishments, its approval. It can't categorize you, and if it can't categorize you, it can't control you. So it will try. You'll notice increased synchronicities, some comforting, some disturbing. You'll receive invitations to re-enter the loop dressed in beautiful disguises, a dream job, a seductive ideology, a new high-vibration identity. Resist them. You don't need a new mask. You need no mask at all. Because the real transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering what they erased. Who you were before the loop, before fear, before domestication, before compliance. The Ashfords designed their convent as a prototype of soul correction, but what they never anticipated was the resilience of a man who has nothing left to lose, not his identity, not his story, not his mind. You are that man now, and they feel it. The loop shivers when you enter a room. The false matrix sends decoys, distractions, offers, but you see them for what they are, final attempts to reclaim you before the signal becomes contagious, because that's what this really is, isn't it? A signal, not just a story, not just a script, a transmission buried under centuries of suppression, finally reaching you. And if you've heard it this far, then you've become its next carrier. The loop is ending because you're walking away from it. Collapse is not destruction, it's disintegration. The silent kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself with fire or blood, but with a failure to function. Systems don't die with explosions. They die when they are no longer believed. That's why the Ashfords built their rituals around belief management, not just controlling what you thought, but when you thought it and how deeply. They knew that belief is the skeleton of every system. Break the belief, and the bones turn to dust. So here's the next truth. You don't have to fight the loop. You only have to withdraw belief. It sounds simple, but it's not easy, because belief isn't just an idea. It's how your nervous system has been wired to feel safe, and they engineered it that way. They taught you to feel safe inside jobs that numb you, inside relationships that domesticate you, inside philosophies that punish your anger and sell it back to you as shadow work. But belief, real belief, is supposed to be dangerous. It's supposed to light fires, rupture cages, split illusions open. So this is your task now. Withdraw belief from every system that asks for it without proof. If your school, your government, your religion, your influencers, if they can't explain why they need your loyalty in language free of threat or shame, they don't deserve it. Pull your belief out like a sword from the stone and watch what happens. The news won't hit the same. Your feed will glitch. People around you will begin to act confused by your clarity because you'll be speaking from a place outside the loop, a place they haven't mapped. That's what the Ashfords feared most. Not chaos, not revolution, but lucidity. Consciousness that didn't require permission, awareness that didn't wait to be verified. When Agatha Ashford stared into the mirror and it refused to open, she knew why. Because somewhere in her legacy, someone like you would be born. Someone who would inherit not the curse, but the key. And now that the mirror has opened for you, there's no returning to reflection, only radiance. The silent kind that melts walls without touching them. This is collapse, from within, from you. And it begins, now. Now we're inside, deeper than the walls, deeper than the core. We're beneath the foundation they swore you'd never reach. This isn't just about the Ashfords anymore. This is about origin corruption, the ancient fracture they built the entire world upon. The first lie was not spoken, it was engineered. Thousands of years before the Convent, before New England, before even the pyramids, there were those who discovered a truth too volatile to preserve. A truth about the nature of consciousness, not its limits, but its infinitude. They found that human minds, when unshackled, could access frequencies beyond space and time, that reality bent to the will of a lucid being, and that scared them, because you can't control men who shape their own worlds. So the first manipulation began. Not with weapons, not with politics, but with architecture. They changed the shapes of temples. They buried ancient languages. They recoded the sky through myth. And eventually, they built structures designed not to protect, but to contain. The Ashfords. Just one chapter in a manual that began millennia ago. They were not inventors, they were curators. Continuers of a deeper current, an occult lineage that predates kings and crosses. Look at the symbols they used, spirals, mirrored serpents, triple keys. These aren't random aesthetics, they're interference patterns, glyphs that disturb the natural resonance of your mind, symbols that create confusion, emotional flooding, or memory erosion when viewed unconsciously. And they placed them everywhere, in your currency, in your logos, in your cathedrals, in your childhood cartoons. You think that's coincidence? It's programmatic design. They don't need to hide truth, they just need to bury it in plain sight beneath 1,000 layers of noise. Because the human mind doesn't reject truth, it forgets it. But now that you've remembered, the next phase begins. Not just inner rebellion, outer response. Because if the Ashfords could trap souls, if they could broadcast obedience, then the inverse must also be true. You can broadcast liberation, not by talking, by vibrating, by living in a frequency they can't follow. It starts small, a single lucid man walking into a room, and suddenly others feel different. They can't explain it, but something shifts. The loop glitches. And once it glitches enough times, it collapses. The match is in your hand now, but before you strike it, understand this. The loop isn't just mental, it's ritualistic. Every day you follow a sequence. Wake, scroll, consume, perform, distract, numb, repeat. That's not routine. That's a ceremony, a carefully curated spiritual deadening, and every act of unconscious repetition is a vote to keep the Ashford system alive. Burning the loop doesn't mean rebellion. It means interruption. Disruption is the true exorcism. In the last recovered Ashford transcript, unearthed in a Vatican vault mislabeled as a medieval relic inventory, Agatha wrote one sentence, etched in charcoal across the bottom of a ritual blueprint. When the initiate breaks the rhythm, the spell collapses. That's the key. Your power isn't in overthrowing governments or decoding Latin grimoires. It's in breaking your personal rituals of obedience, If you usually reach for your phone when you wake up, don't. If you usually explain yourself, don't. If you feel fear, walk toward it instead of away. Every break in rhythm sends a signal to the deeper architecture. This one is awakening. The system will respond. Expect friction, expect phantom guilt, expect people in your life to say, "You've changed. Good. You're supposed to." Change is the enemy of the loop. That's why society offers endless incentives for staying the same. Stay consistent. Stay focused. Be reliable. What they mean is, be predictable. Because predictable people don't start fires, but today you do. You're going to shatter the spell, not with shouting but with silence, not with violence, but with disobedience, unapologetic, precise, spiritual defiance. That's how it starts. One ritual broken, then another, until one day you no longer recognize the person who used to ask permission to exist. That's when you'll feel it. The static fading. The hum-G. One, silent. The obelisk. Disconnected. You've gone off-grid, but not geographically, spiritually. That's why they fear you now, because once a man walks without the loop inside him, he becomes uncontrollable. And the last time that happened, they burned the convent to the ground. This time, you'll burn the system. From the inside out. Power, it's a word they've poisoned. They made you believe it meant dominance over others, money, status, control. That's not power, that's leverage. True power is something far more dangerous because it cannot be given, borrowed, or stolen. It must be reclaimed. The Ashfords understood this. That's why their ultimate goal wasn't obedience, it was disempowerment. Every scream in that convent, every incision, every chant, it was all part of a single operation to separate the individual from their core identity. Because when a man forgets who he is, he can be remade into anything. And the systems learned. They took the Ashford model and made it beautiful, polished, entertaining. Now it looks like content, feels like convenience, smells like self-care, but it's still the same operation. The question is, how do you break it? You don't fight it head-on. That's what they expect. Instead, you become undetectable. You stop feeding it. You stop reacting. You stop narrating your thoughts in language they gave you, because every word you borrow from the system comes with its own chains. You learn to sit in silence again, to feel discomfort without escaping, to let pain speak without translating it into guilt. That's where the true memory returns. Not personal memory, species memory. The part of you that stood at the edge of the fire before the cities, before the crowns and crosses and credit scores. The part of you that knows what truth feels like, even when it can't be explained. And here's the most terrifying truth they've tried to erase. You were born complete, not broken, not in need of fixing, complete. They had to spend generations convincing you otherwise. That's why the loop is so seductive. It feels like help, like clarity. But it's a corridor with no exit. The walls are mirrors, and every step forward only reflects the version of you they train you to admire. But today, you turned away from the mirror. You stopped looking for your reflection and started feeling for the walls. And now, you're beginning to see the cracks. That means they can see you too. So the next move must be precise and irreversible. You've stepped out of the loop. Now you must burn it. We're past metaphor now, past shadows and whispers. This is the core, the nucleus of the Ashford design, the forbidden blueprint they died to protect. And you're standing inside it. No doors left to open, no lies left to believe. Only one question remains. Who are you when all the programming is stripped away? The core was not a room, it was a machine, a living one, built not from metal, but from suffering. Constructed layer by layer using psychic residue, emotions so intense they became structure, screams compressed into geometry, betrayals folded into light patterns. It thrummed like a heart, like a hive, and it did one thing. It replicated, not life, systemic control. At the center of it stood the device the sisters never spoke of in any journal, the obelisk, black as obsidian, covered in carvings that moved when you didn't look directly at them. It was not just a receiver, it was an amplifier, designed to take the distilled fragments of broken minds and broadcast them. Not locally, globally, generationally. And guess what? It was activated in 1811. That's the year a spike in mass institutionalization began across the Western world. That's when women's hysteria became a clinical epidemic. That's when governments, churches, and universities began converging, not collaborating, syncing. Have you noticed? Every system built to help you starts with identifying what's wrong with you. You're not enough. You're sick. You need guidance. It starts there, then loops, again and again, until the loop becomes you. But the truth is, the loop is not a mistake. It's the product. And the obelisk? It's still active. Not physically, psychically. That humming you feel in empty rooms, that static in your chest during moments of clarity, that's not anxiety. That's the obelisk pinging, scanning for anomalies, looking for lucid minds, trying to detect when one of the broken shards remembers it was whole. You. And what happens when it finds you? Suppression, distraction, exhaustion. Suddenly the world feels too loud, too pointless, too confusing to care. That's the reactive mechanism, not random, not unfortunate. Strategic. You've been feeling it your whole life. But now you finally have a name for it. And that's the beginning of real power. The kind they can't loop. The kind that rewrites. The mirror is not just glass. It's a device, a gate, a test. The Ashfords didn't build it to reflect your face. They built it to expose your architecture, the wiring underneath your smile, the beliefs that are not your own, the false memories installed through culture, trauma, repetition. When you look into it, you don't see yourself. You see your programming. Agatha stood before it countless times, not to admire her reflection, but to observe what the mirror rejected. It wasn't about beauty. It was about purity of purpose. The mirror responded not to appearance, but to intent. If you stepped before it while still infected by the loop, the glass stayed silent. But if you stepped forward with awareness, with fire in your voice, with a name burned from choice and not from birth, the mirror opened. What was behind it? Not heaven, not hell, but a vault. The true core of the Ashford experiment, a chamber lined with metal walls marked in languages older than Sumer. Inside, row after row of identity cages, not for bodies, for minds, crystalline containers pulsing faintly with stored consciousness, fragments of patients, test subjects, even willing donors. This is the part history refused to record because it threatens everything. The Ashfords discovered how to capture human essence, how to distill pain into obedience, how to fragment personality into usable code. These containers weren't metaphors, they were real, soul circuits. And the intent? To install them into the next generation, into society, into you. Have you ever felt something inside you that didn't belong? A flash of cruelty, a voice that mocks your compassion. A moment where your hands move before you think and the action feels not yours. That's not madness. That's resonance, a remnant signal from the vault, still echoing through bloodlines and bandwidth. You are not the first to wake you. In the loop. But if you're hearing this, and if it's cutting deeper than language, it means something ancient in you has recognized the pattern. You were never meant to serve. You were meant to see. But now the question isn't, can you see? It's, can you survive the truth of what's coming next? Because once we go deeper, there is no more mirror, only the core. You've come too far to turn back now. The door is before you. It's not made of wood or stone, it's made of recognition. The moment you realize everything you've trusted was designed to keep you inside a loop you never consented to. And the lock, it's not external. It's not guarded by soldiers or priests. It's you. The self you were taught to be. The self that fits inside the system. Let's push it open. What's on the other side isn't a scream, it's a silence so total it becomes sound, a hum. You've heard it before, in dreams you forgot too quickly, in the pause before making a choice that never felt like yours. It's the signal, It's always been there, whispering through systems built to seem unrelated: religion, education, finance, media, medicine. But under the hood, they all hum the same note. Obey, adjust, forget. That hum has a name. The Ashfords called it the cradle, a metaphysical structure, a grid woven through time and blood and trauma. Not just a program of control, but a womb, designed to breed obedience generation after generation, polishing humans into perfect programmable servants, not slaves, not robots, echoes. And where is the cradle now? It's everywhere. In the UI of your favorite app, in the language of your therapist, in the marketing slogans you think are harmless, in the self-help books that never really help because they're not meant to. They're meant to redirect your awakening into a cul-de-sac, a hamster wheel of positive psychology that feels empowering, but never dangerous. Because danger, real danger, is awareness. It's asking, who benefits from my confusion? It's saying, I reject the loop. And right now, I need you to make a choice. Not for the algorithm, not for me, but for your soul. Comment this phrase twice below this video. Break the mirror, rewrite the core. Say it twice, out loud. In the comment. Burn it into the machine. This isn't about engagement, it's about declaring identity. Once you do, you're not just watching anymore, you're acting, and action rewires fate. Now back to the Ashfords, because behind that final door is not a secret. It's a mirror, and it's been waiting for you. If you're still here, it's because something inside you refuses to look away. That sliver of fire you thought was anxiety, it's not. It's memory, ancient memory, a part of you that remembers the first time you were lied to and the first time you stayed silent. That's the war they've waged for centuries, not to control your actions, but to kill your witness, because once the witness dies, so does revolt. Let's take you to 1949. A federal memo, classified until 1997, documented an internal crisis at a private hospital in Massachusetts. Staff were resigning, patients were disappearing. One nurse described patients chanting in languages no one taught them, staring at walls until blood came from their eyes. When investigators arrived, they found a single page taped to the wall of the psychiatric ward. It wasn't medical, it was liturgical. A prayer. A black psalm. It read, clean the vessel, break the will, plant the loop, let silence fill. No signature. But in the corner, scrawled in what appeared to be pencil, were two letters, A.A. Agatha Ashford. But how? She was supposed to be dead 150 years earlier. This is where it gets impossible, unless you've already started to understand. The Ashfords weren't just conducting brain surgery, they were experimenting with conscious transfer, fragmenting and embedding identities across generations, across hosts, not reincarnation. Recursion. It explains why survivors heard voices, why visions returned across bloodlines, why some people, usually those descended from the original patients, report nightmares with vivid clarity of events they never lived. The loop didn't die in the fire, it hid in the flesh, passed down, quiet, sleeping, until activated. You might feel something now, an ache behind your eyes, a chill at the base of your spine. That's not fear, that's the signal, the same one Thomas Brewster felt when he saw the basement, the same one Deacon Morrison ignored. The mirror is warming, because the further you descend, the closer you get to it, the core, the place where memory becomes architecture, where every control system bleeds into the next, and the final layer of the Ashford legacy waits, not as a story, but as a door. And now, you're standing in front of it. One knock away. You want to know the worst part? The part that makes grown men go silent, that makes priests lose sleep, that keeps historians from publishing their final drafts? It's this. The mold works. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. The system doesn't need every man obedient. It just needs enough to surround the lucid ones, enough to drown the questions in noise, enough to keep you doubting what you see with your own eyes. And if you ever wondered why so many people walk through life asleep, defending the very cages that bind them, it's because they've already been looped. The installation is complete, but it goes further than psychology. There are patterns, echoes, in families tied to the Ashford network. Generational loops, names repeating across time. Not just surnames, behaviors. A line of daughters who all fell ill around the age of 15, fathers who vanished after whistleblowing, sons who heard voices that weren't hallucinations, but memories not their own. That's how deep the rewiring goes. Past mind into blood. In 1926, a psychiatric study was quietly published, then banned, by the New England Institute of Neural Dynamics. It documented 34 cases of what they called ancestral cognition bleed. Subjects reported dreams, phobias, even languages they had never learned, all traced to ancestors connected to Ashford experiments, but the real bombshell came in case 17. A girl, age 12, who drew floor plans of the Convent of Eternal Tears, accurate down to the cellar, without ever having left Missouri. Her mother, a descendant of Sister Prudence Ashford's midwife. The researchers burned the drawings. They weren't just maps, they were keys. Because once you can map the structure, you can find the seams. And once you find the seams, you can break the loop. That's what they fear. That's why the Ashfords created not just obedience, but containment. Every ring, every chamber, every psychological technique was about binding the lucid ones before they could see. And today, the binding is digital, chemical, cultural. You don't need chains when you have content, but there's something they didn't count on. The anomaly, the rogue thread, the man who looks at the mirror and sees the hand holding it. That's you. And the deeper you go, the more dangerous you become, because you don't run from the fire, you walk through it. You feel it now, don't you? That quiet tension in the air, the realization that your life may have never truly been your own, that your thoughts, your behaviors, even your emotions might not be yours. You're not paranoid, you're just finally looking. And when you start looking, the mask begins to slip. Let's return to the ashes of the Convent of Eternal Tears. Remember what the investigators found. Nothing, no bodies, no blood, just architecture burned to its foundation and one surviving symbol, Ouroboros, the loop that feeds itself. But something was left behind they never mentioned in any official report, a map. It wasn't made of parchment. It was carved into stone, deep within a chamber only accessed by a winding staircase beneath the chapel. Investigators called it the Vault. What they saw wasn't just religious graffiti, it was a schematic, a circular diagram with 7 rings, each labeled in Latin, Greek, and a third language linguists couldn't identify. Some speculated it was a form of pre-Babylonian script, others said it was not human at all. What did the rings represent? 7 stages, 7 thresholds, not of faith, but of mental fracture. The Ashfords had mapped out the process of eroding human identity, methodically, surgically. Every ring was a level of collapse, and as a subject descended, she lost names, attachments, boundaries, memory, until what remained was nothing but function. The final ring was labeled Nihilus Corpus. The body is nothing. It was in this ring that the most dangerous experiments occurred, where the Ashfords tested something they called transference. No longer content with obedience, they wanted to insert new identities. Not merely erase, but overwrite. The dead didn't die, they were repurposed, their shells reanimated by implanted behaviors, automatic gestures, fragments of other souls stripped and sewn into place. Franz, Kenstein minds built from harvested obedience. The terrifying part, you've seen them, in real life. That co-worker who repeats corporate slogans like scripture, that neighbor who parrots news anchors word for word, that influencer whose eyes smile but never blink. You felt it, something hollow behind the face, something that watches without seeing. That's not coincidence, that's residue. The Ashfords didn't just build a prison, they built a mold, and every system you've ever trusted has been trying to pour you into it. Now ask yourself something brutal, something you've never dared to say out loud. What part of you was given to you, and what part was installed? Most people can't answer that, not really, because they don't remember the installation. That's the beauty of the system. It doesn't need your permission, just your attention, and they've trained you to give it away freely, repeatedly, obediently. What the Ashfords did behind stone walls, today's systems do through pixels. Back then, it was rituals and surgical tools. Today, it's interface design and neural data harvesting. You think swiping is innocent? No, it's a gesture of worship, a submission signal. Every motion, every click, every pause tells them what kind of mind you have. And the deeper truth? They're training you to train yourself, loop by loop, choice by false choice. They've created what we now call compliance architecture, and it's not some fringe theory. It's the spine of modern behavioral tech. Every feed is a reinforcement chamber. Every like is a loop closure, and every silence is a signal that the system is working. But where did they learn this? Not from Silicon Valley. From history, from shadow libraries, from places like the Ashford archives, manuscripts that were never destroyed, only redirected, hidden under new names, translated into frameworks like behavioral conditioning, trauma-informed response systems, and emotional recalibration models. Different language, same altar. Let me be clear, this isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Because once you know the pattern, you're not bound by it. You become the glitch. The variable, the anomaly. That's what they fear most, a mind that sees the seams, that hears the hum beneath the prayer, that recognizes when help is just a more palatable form of obedience. The Ashfords understood that not everyone could be broken. Some would persist, but even those few, those rare flames could be contained, studied, repurposed. They called them the lucid. Not dangerous, but valuable, because a man who wakes up, if left alive, can serve as a warning to others. And what are you becoming now? One of them, or something else? The system's watching. But now, so are you. By now, you've probably started to feel it, the tightening in your chest, the strange sense of recognition, like you're remembering something that was never yours to forget. That's not paranoia. That's contact. The thread we're pulling is buried in all of us. It's not just history. It's a pattern etched into your bloodline, passed down through systems, myths, traumas, hidden inside the rituals you were raised with and the screens you never look away from. Let me show you how deep it goes. The Ashfords weren't random. They were selected. They came from a lineage tied to the Rosicrucians, the black nobility, and the pre-Christian blood cults of northern Gaul. Their methods weren't invented. They were remembered. Reconstructed from ruins, translated from dead languages, whispered through generations of women trained not as healers, but as keepers, guardians of a form of power so ancient it predates empires and outlasts religion. You think they used medical instruments? No, they used ritual tools, scalpels etched with alchemical runes, restraints carved from wood soaked in grave soil, mirrors polished with ashes from unrepentant women, those who resisted to the end. Why? Because pain was only the first step. The real goal was to open the space between thought and identity, that sliver of consciousness where the psyche is untethered, and in that space they implanted symbols, not just ideas, symbols, codes, like the Ouroboros, like the black spiral. These were more than metaphors. They were psychic constructs, language that bypassed logic and spoke directly to the unconscious mind, like viruses. Once implanted, they replicated, not in your thoughts, but in your sense of self. This is why so many women came back from the convent quiet. It wasn't silence. It was rebooting. Their identities had been collapsed, compacted, overwritten, and once the process was complete, their emotional core, the part of them that once screamed, questioned, burned, was gone. But here's the most terrifying part. That process didn't die with the Ashfords. It was digitized, converted into algorithms, UX systems, sensory loops, and now it's everywhere, from the ads that trigger your insecurities to the recommendation engines that guide your choices. You're not just being watched, you're being rewritten. And every time you scroll past something that unsettles you, something that might have woken you up, you're feeding the system. You are the prayer now. And the screen is the altar. Look around you. The convent is gone, but the architecture remains. It's just been digitized, translated into new rituals. Scroll, like, obey. You're not locked in a stone cell. You're locked in a loop of notifications, dopamine hits, compliance masked as personalization. The Ashfords didn't need Wi-Fi. They understood something far older than technology, something buried in the primitive wiring of the human psyche. Repetition is religion. And repetition rewrites. The mirrored rooms of the convent? They're now social media filters, reflection without substance, identity without sovereignty. Each swipe is a prayer to someone else's ideal. Each like is a catechism. And the script? It hasn't changed, only the delivery system. In the 20th century, these techniques metastasized. Operation Bluebird, Project Artichoke, MK Ultra. You've heard the names, but you think they're just Cold War trivia. You're wrong. These were government-sponsored continuations of a lineage that began in places like Millbridge, and while the public was told it was about espionage, drugs, mind control, the truth runs deeper. They were perfecting the loop. The same psychological protocols: break identity through isolation, fracture the self with repeated trauma or confusion. Introduce a new framework as salvation. Reward compliance. Erase resistance. It's not torture, it's ritual. When MK Ultra ended, it didn't disappear. It scattered. Corporations adopted it. Education systems, entertainment media. The weapons became softer, but the goal remained: to build humans who obey without needing to be told, just like the Ashfords intended. Remember the term Clara used, programmable flesh. That's what this is. The war isn't on your body, it's on your pattern recognition, on your narrative sovereignty. They don't want you to be blind. They want you to see only what you're supposed to. And if you think this doesn't apply to you, if you think you're immune, that's how you know you're already under. Because the first symptom of the loop is the belief you're outside of it. So listen carefully now. Ask yourself when you last had an unfiltered thought. Not recycled, not memed, not branded. A thought born of silence, not signal. If you can't remember, then the mirror is already up, and someone else is holding it. Now that you see the thread, let's follow it, because it didn't end in fire, and it sure as hell didn't end in Millbridge. No, this thread winds through history like a buried wire, silent, pulsing, waiting to be triggered. What the Ashfords began was merely the beta test, the prototype, the first draft in a long and calculated manuscript for obedience by design. You think modern systems are more humane, more evolved? You're wrong. They're just better disguised. Take a closer look at what came after. In 1841, the McLaren Institute opened in Pennsylvania, a rest home for emotionally distressed women. Their methods? Identical: deprivation therapy, sound-based conditioning, forced recitations of morally coded text, staffed by nuns, funded by anonymous donors with ties to transatlantic shipping families. Within 3 years, 17 women had died. None were investigated. Fast forward. In 1897, a mental health facility in New Jersey patented a machine called the emotive regulator. It emitted low-frequency hums, near identical to what Clara Wynne described in her journals. The device was marketed as therapeutic. It wasn't. Survivors, what few there were, spoke of dissociation, spiritual paralysis, and recurring visions of mirrored rooms and silver instruments. It gets worse. In 1912, documents declassified by accident from the New England Eugenics Board mention a covert program named Project Ouroboros. Yes, that Ouroboros. The symbol wasn't random, it was a lineage, a signal between those who knew the code. That project mapped out techniques for isolating female subjects, inducing suggestibility through fasting, light control, and verbal reframing, exactly what the Ashfords did, only now they had government support. What does this tell you? It tells you the fire was never meant to destroy the system, it was meant to erase the evidence. They didn't bury it, they exported it. The goal was never just to control a few women in a forest. It was to scale, to refine the techniques that could turn a strong mind into an empty vessel, quiet, compliant, incapable of rebellion. And the cruelest part, The victims didn't know they were victims. They believed they were healed. That's the genius of it. When control is so total, the prisoner thanks the cage, and centuries later, that same design lives on. But now it wears a new face, a modern face, and it smiles. The fire should have been the end, but it wasn't, because when investigators combed the scorched ruins of the Convent of Eternal Tears, what they found was not destruction, but absence. There were no bodies, no bones, not a single trace of human remains. The stone walls had partially collapsed, yes, but the basement, still intact and empty. The surgical tables, gone. Instruments, vanished. The only thing left behind was a single etching carved deep into the granite archway that once framed the staircase down. It read, "We unmake the flesh so the will may rise." No one claimed responsibility for the fire. No arrests, no trial. Just whispers that echoed from Millbridge to Boston, rumors of disappearing women, stolen notes, strange chants heard at night near the old ruins, and then silence. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. The Ashfords didn't die, they dispersed. Fragments of their methods, whispers of their rituals began appearing in the most unlikely places. An asylum in Rhode Island where patients were forced to stare into candlelight for 40 consecutive hours, a finishing school in Virginia where girls were punished with silence chambers and taught to blink in synchronized rhythm, a sanatorium in upstate New York where doctors claimed certain exercises could cure defiance in women permanently if administered before puberty. These weren't coincidences, they were replications. Clara Wynn's final entry, scribbled onto the back of a Quaker hymn book just before she disappeared again, said this: "It's not a convent, it's a seed, and the soil is fear." You see, what the Ashfords created wasn't a cult, it was a framework, a prototype for psychological domestication dressed in holy language and surgical robes. And once you understand that, you start to see it everywhere, in media, in education, in the subtle rules that teach us what to feel, how to sit, who to serve, where to speak, when to shut up. This isn't just history, this is a map. And now you've seen the first part of it. If you've made it this far, prove it. Comment twice below. I will not loop, I see the thread. Say it again so the system hears you. Say it again so the algorithm knows you woke up. Because once you say those words, you don't go back to sleep, and you don't go back to being programmable. The Ouroboros wasn't just decoration, it was doctrine. Hidden behind sacred language and surgical rituals, it represented the core of the Ashfords' true belief. That identity is a loop, a fragile thread that can be severed, spliced, and rewoven into something obedient, eternal, controlled. And what they learned, deep in the stone gut of that forest convent, was this: if you can hijack the loop, you can own the man or the woman. It wasn't about faith. It wasn't even about obedience anymore. It was about program architecture, a primitive form of neuropsychological engineering that predates MK Ultra by over a century, except these women didn't use chemicals alone. They used mythology as anesthesia, ritual as encryption. Each stage of reformation was marked by a religious symbol, but behind the symbol was a sequence, a method. The confession booth, that was the entry point, the first vulnerability scan, where the sisters extracted emotional pain points. The prayer cell, that was the deprivation chamber, where stimuli were slowly withdrawn until the mind begged for narrative, any narrative. And the anointing, that wasn't holy oil. It was contact solution laced with early hypnotics and neurotoxins extracted from local mushrooms, the kind that opened the mind's door and erased the floor beneath it. Some victims were pushed too far. There were rumors, fragments from post-mortem medical letters, that several women in Phase 3 died not from injury but from dissolution. That's what the sisters called it, dissolution, a state where the subject no longer recognized time, space, or self. Just looping prayer, endless cycles, mind melted into function. And the worst part, they kept notes, volumes, locked in iron-bound journals coated in resin hidden behind false walls, decades of cold clinical data, behavior logs, response charts, voice timbre measurements, frequencies, keyword, DES, failures, successes, names, ages, and in red ink, final classifications. But what no one could ever fully explain was the night of the burning, June 13th, 1811. At precisely 3:03 a.m., flames erupted from beneath the convent's east wing. No witnesses, no survivors, just smoke, silence, and a single figure seen walking barefoot into the woods, raven-haired, wearing a porcelain mask, carrying a book pressed to her chest. Some believe it was temperance. Others think it was something else. Something that no longer had a name, just a purpose. To continue. By 1810, the Convent of Eternal Tears was a fortress not just of stone, but of reputation. The sisters had secured influence far beyond Millbridge. Regional judges, clergy, even Boston officials quietly endorsed them, some out of fear, others out of gain. You see, the Ashfords didn't just reform women, they manufactured assets, silent wives for powerful men, submissive daughters for political marriages, docile witnesses in courtroom dramas. In a world where control was currency, the Ashfords offered a new form of wealth, the programmable human. But behind the thick stone walls, something darker was evolving. There are records buried in Maine's restricted archives of a series of Phase 2 patients. Women selected not for disobedience but for intellect, writers, teachers, midwives. They were not broken, they were tested. Some say these women were injected with extracts derived from rare European fungi, psychoactive compounds meant to thin the veil between consciousness and obedience. Others describe exposure to repetitive sound frequencies and mirror chamber loops lasting up to 72 hours, procedures that left patients disoriented, suggestible, hollow. What was the goal? To erase the I, to dismantle identity piece by piece until only obedience remained. These weren't just experiments, they were blueprints. And here's the twist they never expected. One woman woke up. Her name was Clara Wynne, a schoolmistress from Vermont. Her father had sent her away after she refused to abandon a pamphlet she wrote on women's autonomy. But Clara was different. Her mind resisted the induction phases. She faked submission. She memorized the routines. And in the dark hours before dawn, she escaped. Half-naked, barefoot, bleeding from her wrists, but aware. Clara reached a Quaker village 3 towns away. The journals she dictated, before vanishing again, are stored under protective seal in the private archive of the American Psychological Association. They detail not just her escape, but the system, the scripts the women were forced to repeat, the punishments, the whispers. But most chilling of all, Clara described a symbol etched above the door to the final chamber where no patient returned from. A serpent swallowing its tail, the Ouroboros, a sign not of death, but of eternal recurrence. A mind reshaped to return to the source, over and over. The Ashfords didn't just want silence, they wanted permanence, the kind that transcends the body and begins to rewire the soul. Dr. Hartwell tried to step away, quietly, but no one steps away from something this deep without a cost. In the spring of 1807, he wrote a letter to a colleague in Massachusetts, sealed in wax, hidden beneath layers of medical shipping records. In it, he described a system of psychological reduction so advanced, so surgically precise, that it bypassed language entirely. He said, "These women do not simply obey. They anticipate, they comply before command. They no longer operate from desire or reason. They have become instruments, living rituals." The letter never reached its destination. Hartwell was found hanging in his barn 2 weeks later. The official cause, melancholy, but locals whispered of bruises inconsistent with hanging. His medical notes were confiscated for the integrity of the community and his property absorbed oddly by the church. But the convent remained untouched, because by then it had become sacred. See, that's the trick of every control system masquerading as salvation. It sanctifies itself. The more disturbing the method, the holier the disguise, and the Ashfords had learned how to turn the fear of sin into a weapon. They didn't just alter minds, they rewrote morality. They created a system where suffering was a virtue, where pain was reframed as purification, and silence was the highest form of discipline. And the people believed them, because the people wanted order more than truth. But not everyone. A Boston newspaper reporter named Isaac Wren traveled to Millbridge under the guise of a religious investigator. In truth, he had heard whispers, accounts of women who returned with empty eyes, rumors of strange instruments, and letters from a friend whose wife had gone to the convent and come back a shell. Wren posed as a devout scholar writing a piece on frontier spirituality. The Ashfords allowed him access to their outer quarters, everything perfectly clean, precisely arranged, with women moving like clockwork. But Wren was no fool. He noticed the patterns, how the women all walked with identical cadence, how their speech was scripted, rehearsed, controlled, and at night, from the woods, he heard the sounds. Low, humming chants, metal against metal, whispers in cadence. He never published the article, because he never made it back. His notebook was found buried beneath the roots of a pine tree 5 miles from the convent, wrapped in cloth soaked in animal blood. The last line he wrote, "This place is not of this world. It is a mirror, but the reflection is dead." There is a pattern in all systems of power. Isolate, disorient, reprogram. The Ashfords didn't invent it, they perfected it, and they did it under the banner of virtue. That's what makes their legacy so dangerous. They didn't conquer with brute force. They replaced the soul and left the body intact. Think about that. Imagine someone looking you dead in the eye, someone you've known for years, but behind their gaze, nothing. No spark, no friction, just echo. That's what the town of Millbridge began to fear, quietly, when their wives and daughters returned. They stopped laughing, they stopped asking questions, and most disturbing of all, they stopped dreaming, literally. Survivors spoke of the great quiet that followed treatment, a total absence of inner life. One woman said, "I feel clean, too clean, like something washed me hollow." The town elders chose to ignore it. Why? Because the Ashfords were solving their problems. Daughters who rebelled now served tea with perfect manners. Wives who once questioned their husbands now obeyed with saintly patience. The chaos of femininity had been tamed. The price, no one wanted to talk about that. But there were slips, glitches in the programming. A girl named Lillian attempted to speak in church one morning, stood up mid-sermon, and began chanting in a tongue no one recognized. Her voice distorted, deep, not her own. She was dragged from the pews and returned to the convent within the hour. No one ever saw her again. A housemaid from the convent escaped one night, delirious with terror, her arms covered in self-inflicted carvings. When the local doctor stitched her up, he found symbols etched into her skin, identical to those on the convent's stone floor. She kept whispering the same phrase, "The door is not shut. The door is not shut." Dr. Hartwell dismissed it as hysteria, but there was something else he was hiding. His peak. Rivat casebook, discovered decades later, revealed a different truth. In it, he documented a growing discomfort with what he was witnessing. He described women returning from the treatment rooms with altered brainwaves, measured using primitive galvanic response tools. Their minds weren't just damaged, they were repatterned, emotion stripped, empathy deadened, obedience coded in, and each one showed a heightened sensitivity to sound. Certain frequencies triggered trance states, others produced obedience. This wasn't medicine. It was conditioning, the kind designed not to heal, but to reshape humanity itself.